You know, tanks are incredibly complicated, fire around kind of 2,800 feet per second. This is the harsh statistics of tank warfare in World War II. These little things give you just that little bit of an edge, and that is absolutely crucial and very often the difference between living and dying.
This isn't a museum, it's World War II armour in Florida, where tanks and weapons from the Second World War still work. I'm James Holland, come with me.
Well, I am a really big fan of the Sherman tank. For my money, it's the best all-round tank of the entire Second World War. And there were lots of them, 49,000, which basically means there's 36 more Sherman tanks for every single one Tiger tank. That really matters. There's so many things about the Sherman that I think really give it an incredible edge, but one of them is inside here in the turret. So I'm going to show you an exclusive little tour of what it's like inside the Sherman tank. Here we go. So I am sitting in the commander's position here. Now you can sit down here, or you could just stand up on this bit and be up. Here is the gunner. And you can see these pedals on the floor. Electric fire button, manual fire button. This is a really interesting feature because this is the override switch. So what that means is if the commander is out of the turret, he's got his head and shoulders over the turret, and he suddenly sees something, he can switch this and this starts moving the turret. And that just gives a kind of a second's extra advantage over the gunner actually doing it. And I'll give you an example of this. So on Monday, the 26th of June, 1944, John Semkin was commanding a Sherman tank, turned a corner in a little village in Normandy and came face to face with a Tiger. Because he was experienced, he already had one up the spout. He had an armor-piercing round in the breech, and he just said, fire, straight away. It hit the gun mantlet of the Tiger tank, which is the bit that kind of protects the front of the turret as the barrel of the gun enters the turret. And shards spalling from this hit struck the Tiger driver, blinding him. Immediately, the commander of the Tiger tank disappeared down into the turret. And in the next 30 seconds, John Semkin's Sherman, which was just a 75mm ordinary medium-sized gun, Sherman tank, managed to strike the Tiger a further 9 times before the Tiger got off a single shot. And after that 10th shot, about 30 seconds into the engagement, the crew of the Tiger bailed out and surrendered. The Tiger wasn't disabled, it was just that it couldn't fire back in that moment. And this is the point. You don't need to destroy a tank to disable it. All you need to do is stop that crew from being able to function. And that's why he who hits first usually comes out on top. And this is where the Sherman really, really scores points, because it's got this override switch here. It's got a gun stabilizing gyro just here, which means it's more stable when it's on the move, which again gives it a little edge over everything else, because no German tank has a gun stabilizing gyro at all. The other thing is, because you're putting in a 75mm shell, it's actually smaller, which means it's easier to manhandle in the comparatively narrow confines of a turret than a larger shell, such as, you know, an 88mm that you'd have in a Tiger. So again, that gives you advantage. So it's very easy to look at something like the Tiger tank and say, well, on paper, this is a much better tank than a Sherman because it's got an 88mm high velocity gun and it's got really thick armor and it looks scary. But in actual fact, the Sherman has these many, many attributes which really give it an edge. And everything around this turret is just laid out very ergonomically. Most people are right-handed. They're taught to be right-handed in the 1920s and 30s, which means you want to have your gunner where you are, Nick, filming this, because then you can swing it from your right-hand side into the breech. All tank turrets are really, really cramped, but there's lots about this that work really well and make perfect sense. There's many things that come into play here which most people might not think about when they're considering it that actually make a huge difference. And the speed of fire, the rate of fire, the kind of little features like the override switch, like the gun stabilizing gyro, like the control pedals for the gunner, etc., the positioning of the loader, all of these make really, really perfect sense. And in a duel where time is absolutely everything and he who sees first tends to come out on top, these little things give you just that little bit of an edge, and that is absolutely crucial and very often the difference between living and dying. So I'm now in the driver's compartment of the Sherman tank, and again, it's just incredibly simple. So here, this is the transmission. This is the gearbox. It looks complicated, but actually for a tank, it's really not. In terms of operating it, you know, here are all the switches here. Your panel is just to the left of you. You can see them really, really clearly. It's clutch here, so here's the gears, and you just move it into first, into second, into third. Well, actually that was fourth. That is third, and so it's really, really easy. That's just back in neutral. I mean, it couldn't be easier. Here's the throttle, so it's clutch and throttle, and this is how you control it with the stick. So it's effectively braking it. That brakes this side, which then means you're keeping to going with the track on the right-hand side, and that pushes you round to the left. So that's how it works. It's super simple. I mean, it couldn't be more straightforward. And you have an option of having the seat a bit higher, so like this. And then you can sit with your head out of it, or you can just lower it down again, and you're covered in depending on the periscope. So you've got either or, and it's just, tanks are incredibly complicated. So you want this incredibly complicated beast to be as simple as you possibly can, and everything about this is following that adage. And what one has to remember is that in 1939, there are 3 people for every motorized vehicle in the USA. So you've got lots of people who know how to drive an automobile. They know how to change gear. And that just gives you such an advantage. Compare that with Germany, for example. In 1939, there are 47 Germans for every motorized vehicle. So you've got lots of youngsters who are going into something like a Tiger tank or a Panther, which is considerably more complex and difficult to drive than a Sherman tank. And they come a cropper. They just don't know what they're doing. You know, the training process for these drivers is so much harder. You know, if you take the gearbox for a Tiger tank, for example, it's effectively got 18 different speeds. It is on paper a 6-speed semi-hydraulic pre-selected gearbox designed by Ferdinand Porsche. It sounds complicated. It is complicated. Whereas this is simplicity supreme. There's so many different variants of the Sherman. The first one came with a 75mm medium gun, which could fire a shell at around 2,000 feet per second. This is a 76mm, slightly higher velocity, fire around kind of 2,800 feet per second. There were molded hulls like this one. There were also ones with a flat side, but they all shared certain characteristics. Right up until the very end of the war, they had the same suspension, they had the same chassis, and the same basic structure. And what that meant was, when you were trying to do mass production, a lot of the machine tools that you needed, they could all be the same. So when you're creating anything, creating machine tools is part of the process. So you have to get the machine tools which are going to be able to make you the various parts that you need. Once you've got those, then you're away. And then what you want to do is you want to keep it as simple as you possibly can. So really, really kind of pragmatic in their approach. You can see here, this is the front section. When we were inside the tank, we had a look at the transmission. These are the bolts that you would undo to get into the transmission area. You literally have a huge great spanner, undo them, take this bit off, and off you go. It's still a complicated business to change the transmission, but it's nothing like as complicated as it is in just about every other tank that was created in the Second World War. So these things are all really important. You see this? This is one of the most important features of a Sherman tank because they're all coming from North America. This is where they're built. You've got these, which mean you can hoist them into a Liberty ship. And that means you can get lots of them over the Atlantic. These are absolutely vital. And this actually is one of my favorite features of the Sherman tank because this is the suspension arms, the suspension bogie. And again, it's just very simple for something that's actually quite complicated. It's on the outside. So if anything gets hurt, if anything gets damaged on the suspension, you can literally just unbolt it and put another one on. You can even take ones off knocked out tanks and put them on. They're all completely interoperable, no matter what mark of Sherman tank it is. They did change the suspension right at the very end of the war, but the vast majority of the war, they were all the same. You compare that, for example, with a Panther. Panther has 36 different wheels on it, 18 on each side. They're all interleaven, and the suspension is behind them. So if you have any problem with suspension, you've got to take everything off to get to it, whereas this you don't. And you've also got fewer wheels, which just makes the whole process of maintaining it in the field much more simple than many other tanks. And at the back here, you've got the engine bay. You've got two doors here, which you can open up and you can get to part of it that way, or you've got the hatch here. And the great thing about this is you don't have to maneuver the turret or anything to get access to it. It's really, really easy to get to. And the amazing thing about this is that you could actually change an engine out of this in about 2 hours in the field. I mean, that is absolutely phenomenal. Ease of access is a big part of it, but then you go in, there's a minimum amount of bolts, you whip it out and you put another one back in. And you can do that in the field. So again, one of the advantages of it being a little bit smaller than, say, a Panther or a Tiger or even a King Tiger is that the equipment you then need to maintain it in the field is also smaller, which is easier to maneuver around and easier to get into the field. So everything about a tank is about payoffs. It's about, you know, pluses and minuses. It's great having a massive gun like the Tiger does and lots of really, really thick armor, but that also comes with all sorts of problems. It's slower to maneuver, it's harder to fire because the shell's bigger, etc., etc. This is a kind of sort of a compromise, but the compromise actually is what you want because numbers really, really count in war, and they particularly count in the Second World War. And when you've got an advantage of 36-1 against a Tiger, for example, which you do with the Sherman tank, that really is a big, big advantage. Shortcomings, it's got a high profile, so it's quite easy to spot, and it's a very distinct shape as well. So again, you know, you compare that to some of the German tanks, and particularly the self-propelled guns like the Stug, you know, which is much lower profile. You know, this loses some points, but what it gains is the ease of maintenance, the rapidity of firing, the speed, the agility, and of course numbers. And the numbers, oh, I just can't tell you how important that is. You know, it really, really makes a huge difference. So this did earn some pretty unfortunate nicknames in the Second World War. It was known as the Tommy Cooker by the British. It was known as a Ronson for its ability to light first time. But actually, some of this is pretty unjustified. What you find actually is in a study of damage to tanks is that a Sherman was no more or less likely to be brewed up, go on fire, be destroyed than any other pretty much on the Allied arsenal. What you find, generally speaking, is the tank that hits first tends to come out on top. But if this is hit, because the armor is not as thick as some, that shot might penetrate. Just imagine what happens when that gets hit by, let's say, an 88mm round. It punches a hole here. It can go all the way through. It might not go all the way through. But you might only have a hole made a size of that on the outside, like a penny. But on the inside, you've got spalling, you've got a glob of molten hot metal, which is spraying around inside this very tight confines of the interior of the Sherman tank. And obviously that is going to be really, really bad news for any of the crew that are in the way of that. The other problem, of course, is inside these turrets, you've got lots and lots of ammunition. You might have lots of fuel. Whether you brew up, whether you burn, your tank burns, rather depends on the stage at which you're hit. So if it's the first engagement of the day and you're absolutely bristling with ordnance and you've got a full tank, you're much more likely to brew up than obviously at the end of the day where you haven't got much ammunition left. So it just really depends on what time of day you get hit. But this is the harsh statistics of tank warfare in World War II. You have no chance. At some point, a tank will get hit. Whether it's a German tank, whether it's a British tank, whether it's an American tank, it just will. In sustained combat, it just almost certainly will get hit. It's just a matter of time. And as a member of the tank crew, you've just got to hope that you get away with it. Because whether you get burnt to a crisp, whether you get away unscathed, whether you lose a limb, or whether you actually just get a light scratch, really is in the lap of the gods. And it's just a question of luck. There are things you can do, experience counts for a lot. You learn the tricks of a trade, you learn a kind of sixth sense, but really it is just, it's a numbers game. And what they do have with this is plenty of numbers.